In the heart of Lagos, a city that breathes concrete and dreams in traffic, there is a market. They say if you cannot find what you're looking for in Balagoon, then it does not exist anywhere in the world. But the market is more than a place of commerce, more than a sprawling collection of stalls, voices, and vibrant clashing colors. It is a living thing, a restless spirit. It is a river of souls, flowing each day from dawn until dusk, carrying with it the hopes, the hustles, the desperation, and the triumphs of millions. And like every living thing, the market has a heart, a soul, and a mother. Our story begins in the textile section, a canyon of color where mountains of adire, ankara, and lace blot out the sun. Here, in a small, open-air workshop stall rented by the formidable Madame Sylvie, two apprentices sat before their looms. They were two seeds planted in the same soil, but their roots were reaching for entirely different kinds of nourishment. The first was Helen. Her fingers, though young, seemed to hold the wisdom of generations as they danced across the threads. She worked with a quiet, focused grace, her brow furrowed in a state of sacred concentration. For Helen, the loom was not a tool of labor, but a partner in creation. She had learned the art at her grandmother's knee in a village far from the city's roar, and she had come to Lagos not merely to make a living, but to make a name. Her dream was a simple yet impossibly large one. To one day have her own stall, a small space in this vast market where she could hang a sign with her own name on it and sell fabrics born not from a master's instruction, but from the patterns in her own heart. She saw the threads not just as cotton, but as stories waiting to be told. The second apprentice was Bio. While Helen's focus was on the world within her loom, Bio's was on the world in his hand. He slouched on his stool, the rhythmic clatter of Helen's work a distant, annoying noise. His own loom sat silent and accusing beside him. His face, illuminated by the searching blue light of a smartphone, was a mask of longing. He was not looking at patterns of thread, but at patterns of success. He scrolled through images of young men his own age, leaning against cars that shone like polished jewels, standing on balconies overlooking cities made of light, holding bottles that fizzed with a life he could only taste on his tongue. He let out a low, envious whistle. "See life," he muttered to himself, the words a bitter prayer. He glanced at Helen, a smirk playing on his lips, a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Ah, Helen, you will soon turn into the loom itself. Your fingers will become shuttles and your back will become the frame. Take it easy. Madame Tessie will not pay you extra because your sweat drips more than anyone else's." Helen did not look up, her rhythm unbroken. "The work is its own reward, Bio," she said, her voice soft but steady. "There is a satisfaction in making something beautiful. You should try it. Madame Tessie needs this order finished for ogatitis." Bio scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. "The work," he repeated, as if the word were a foreign delicacy. He couldn't decide if he liked it. "Let the work buy me a Benz. Let the work put a Rolex on my wrist. This life, my dear Helen, is not about hard work. That is the story they tell us to keep us poor. Life is about smart work. It's about connection. It's about finding the faster road to the palace, not walking the long, dusty path with the commoners." He winked, a gesture that was supposed to be charming, but felt hollow. He was satisfied with his little speech, and he returned to the glowing promises of his phone. She sighed, a small, sad puff of air. and continued her work. A few moments later, the formidable presence of Madame Tessie filled the stall. She was a woman whose posture was as starched and straight as the fabrics she sold. "Helen," she announced, her voice a sharp command. "This bolt is ready. Excellent work. Now, take it to Mr. John in the jewelry section. He has already paid, so do not let anyone delay you. The market waits for no one. Be quick." "Yes, madam," she replied, her voice filled with the respect she genuinely felt. She carefully wrapped the magnificent indigo blue Adire fabric, its patterns like a captured night sky. As she prepared to leave, she felt Bio's eyes on her. It was not a look of friendship, but of lazy, calculating envy. He watched her carry the fruit of her labor as if she were a fool for having planted the tree in the first place. Helen stepped out of the relative calm of the workshop and was immediately swallowed by the river of the market. She clutched the precious fabric to her chest, a prayer on her lips that no one would bump into her, that no stray hand would soil the perfect cloth. She moved with a practiced determination, a fish swimming against a current of bodies. Her mind focused on one thing: Mr. John's shop. It was then that she saw her. An old woman, so ancient her back was bent into a perfect arch, as if in a permanent bow to the earth. Her face was a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles, each line telling a story Helen could not read. She was standing, frail and trembling, beside a small, overturned basket. And all around her, scattered in the orange dust, were thousands and thousands of tiny, shimmering seed beads. They were no bigger than grains of sand, a constellation of lost stars on the filthy ground. A man carrying a sack of rice had bumped into her, sending her life's work scattering into the chaos. He hadn't even looked back. Now, the river of people simply flowed around her, parting and reforming without a thought. They shouted, they haggled, they laughed, and they walked right over the tiny beads, crushing them or kicking them further into the dirt. The old woman was invisible. She was a stone in the middle of the river, unnoticed, alone, staring at the impossible task of gathering her universe back together. Helen stopped. Her feet felt suddenly heavy, rooted to the spot. She clutched the package for Mr. John. The voice of Madame Tessie echoed in her head, "Be quick, the market waits for no one." She knew she was late. She knew her master would be angry, her scolding as sharp as a needle. This errand was important. But then she looked at the old woman. She saw the tremor in her hands, the deep, weary sadness in her eyes. She saw a lifetime of work scattered in the dust, and a world that did not care enough to stop for even a moment. The voices in Helen's head went quiet, replaced by a feeling that rose from deep within her soul. It was a quiet, firm voice that simply said, "Help her." Taking a deep breath, Helen made a choice. She adjusted the package under her arm, walked through the stream of people, and knelt beside the old woman. The noise of the market seemed to fade into a distant hum. "Mama," she said softly, her voice respectful, "let me help you." The old woman slowly turned her head, her eyes, ancient and sharp as obsidian, locking onto Helen's. They held a profound intelligence, a knowing that seemed to see right through Helen's skin and into her heart. She said nothing. She simply gave a slow, small nod, a gesture of acceptance. And so, Helen knelt in the dirt and grime of the Belogan market floor. As the river of people pushed and flowed around her, she began the painstaking task of picking up the tiny beads, her skilled weaver's fingers now searching for treasures in the dust. One by one, she gathered them, her back beginning to ache, the sun beating down on her neck. She could feel the stares of some, the pity or the scorn. Foolish girl, she imagined them thinking, wasting her time. But she ignored them. She focused only on the task, on the feel of each tiny, smooth bead between her thumb and forefinger, and on the silent, watchful presence of the old woman beside her. Time stretched and became meaningless. There was only the dust, the beads, and the quiet act of kindness. An hour passed, or maybe it was more, when the last visible bead was finally rescued from the dust and placed back into the basket. Helen's knees ached and her neck was stiff. She rose slowly, wiping her dusty hands on the side of her wrapper. I think that is all of them, Mama," she said, her voice a little hoarse. The old woman looked at the collection in the basket. Then she looked at Helen, a long, searching look. She reached out with a hand that was surprisingly strong and took Helen's own. She turned it over and looked at the poem as if reading a story written there. Then from a small pouch tied at her waist, she produced a single, dull brass bangle. It was simple, unadorned, and looked utterly worthless. There was no shine to it, no intricate pattern. It was the kind of thing one might see discarded in a gutter. She pressed it into Helen's hand. "For your trouble," the old woman said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "A gift." Helen looked at the worthless piece of metal in her palm. A wave of disappointment, swift and sharp, washed over her. She had expected nothing, yet a small, secret part of her had hoped for something. A blessing? A coin? Not this. But her grandmother had taught her manners that ran deeper than her disappointment. She quickly hid her feelings behind a gracious smile. "Thank you, Mama," she said, her voice genuine. "You did not have to. Wear this for your work," the old woman continued, her sharp eyes seeming to look right through Helen's polite facade. "But do not boast of it. After 7 market days, its true worth will settle. Now go, you are late." And with that, the old woman picked up her basket and with a surprising swiftness disappeared into the crowd, melting back into the river of the market as if she had never been there at all. Helen stood for a moment, the heavy, dull brass bangle in her hand. She slipped it onto her wrist where it sat plain and ugly. It felt more like a burden than a gift. With a sigh, she remembered her errand and began to run, her heart heavy with the certainty of Madame Tessie's anger. She did not know that she had just passed a test set not by a mere mortal, but by the mother of the market herself. And the reward she now wore was more powerful than any gold or silver she could ever imagine. The journey back to Madame Tessie's shop was a torment. Every shout from a vendor sounded like an accusation. Every push from the crowd felt like a punishment. The weight of the brass bangle on Helen's wrist was a dull, constant reminder of the time she had lost. What had she been thinking? Madame Tessie was a fair master, but her patience was as thin as a single silk thread. To waste over an hour on an errand that should have taken 15 minutes was a grave offense. By the time Helen finally saw the rainbow of fabrics at her workshop, her heart was a cold stone in her chest. Madame Tessie was waiting. She stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of thunderous disapproval. Baya was there too, leaning against a post with a look of smug satisfaction, clearly having already told the tale of Helen's long absence. "So," Madame Tessie began, her voice dangerously quiet, "you have decided to return. Mr. John sent his boy here looking for you half an hour ago. He is a busy man, Helen. Do you think his time is worth less than yours?" Helen bowed her head, the wrapped fabric held out like a peace offering. "Forgive me, madam. There was an old woman. She fell. I was only trying to help." "Helping," Madame Tessie's voice rose. "Your job was to help me. Your job was to deliver this cloth. Do you know what Mr. John thinks now? He thinks my workshop is unreliable. He thinks my apprentices are lazy wanderers. In this market, your reputation is the only currency that matters, and you have spent mine foolishly today on a stranger." Each word was a small, sharp blow. Helen could feel her cheeks burn with shame. She did not dare to look at Bio, but she could feel the heat of his mocking gaze. "It will not happen again, madam," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the ground. "See that it does not," Madame Tessie snapped, snatching the package from her hands. "Now, get back to your loom. You have wasted enough of my time and my thread for one day." Dejected, Helen walked back to her station. The joy and focus she usually felt when approaching her work had vanished, replaced by the dull ache of the scolding. She sat on her stool, the unfinished cloth on her loom looking drab and uninspired. Her fingers felt clumsy, her mind empty of patterns. She glanced at the ugly brass bangle on her wrist. A gift, the old woman had called it. It felt more like a curse, the cause of all this trouble. With a heavy heart and heavier hands, she picked up the shuttle and prepared to weave, only hoping to lose herself in the familiar rhythm and forget the shame of the day. The moment her fingers touched the threads, something happened. A warmth, gentle and surprising, pulsed from the brass bangle up her arm. It was not a searing heat, but a comforting, living glow, like the feeling of the morning sun on sleeping skin. The threads in her hand, which moments before had felt coarse and lifeless, suddenly felt different. They seemed to soften, to become pliable and alive, whispering secrets to her fingertips. She looked down at her hands, confused. She pushed the shuttle through the loom. Instead of the usual dull clack, the loom seemed to answer with a soft, melodic thrum. It was a note of pure harmony, a sound she had never heard it make before. Hesitantly, she pushed it again. Thrum. A strange energy began to fill her. The patterns that had been hazy in her mind suddenly blazed with a brilliant clarity. New designs, more intricate than any she had ever dared to imagine, bloomed in her thoughts like a time-lapse film of a garden coming to life. It was as if a dusty window in her soul had been thrown open, flooding her with light. Forgetting her sadness, forgetting Bio and Madame Tessie, she began to work. Her hands, guided by this new, wondrous energy, flew across the loom. They did not feel like her own. They moved with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. She was no longer just weaving. She was painting with thread. She was composing a symphony of color and texture. The shuttle was her conductor's baton, the threads her orchestra, and the loom her stage. She was lost in a dance of creation so profound, so joyful, that the world around her ceased to exist.
Bale, bored of his phone, had been watching her, ready to offer another jeer about her slow pace. But the words died in his throat. His jaw fell slack. He had never seen anyone work like that. Helen was a blur of motion, a whirlwind of focused energy. The cloth on her loom was growing at an impossible rate. It was magic. It had to be. In what felt like a few short minutes, but was in fact another hour, Helen stopped. She leaned back, breathing heavily, her body humming with the strange, beautiful energy. She looked down at what she had made. It was a length of cloth, perhaps 2 yards long, but it was unlike anything she had ever created. The pattern was a breathtaking spiral of kingfisher blue and deep indigo, with flecks of silver thread that caught the light like a constellation of stars. It seemed to shimmer and move, a living piece of the night sky captured in cotton. It was perfect, It was a masterpiece. A hushed silence had fallen over their corner of the stall. Bayo was staring, his mouth agape. Even Madame Tessie, who had been busy with a customer, had turned and was now looking at the cloth on the loom with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Helen," Madame Tessie whispered, taking a step closer. Did you do this?" Helen, still dazed, could only nod. Madame Tessie reached out a hand and touched the fabric, her experienced fingers tracing the impossible pattern. Her expression shifted from disbelief to stunned, unadulterated awe. "In all my years," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "in all my years, I have never seen such work." Bayo pushed himself off the post and strode over. He grabbed the edge of the cloth, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He felt its texture, examined the tightness of the weave, searching for a flaw, a trick, a sign of how she had done it. But there was none. It was simply perfect. "How?" Bayo demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "You were weeping at your loom a moment ago. How did you do this?" Helen looked at her own hands, then at the brass bangle on her wrist. It was dull and ugly as ever, giving away nothing. She remembered the old woman's warning, "Do not boast of it." I don't know," she stammered, which was the honest truth. The pattern came to me." Bayo did not believe her. His eyes scanned her from her tired face to her flying fingers, and then they stopped. They locked onto the bangle. It was the only thing that was different, the ugly, cheap-looking piece of metal. It hadn't been there this morning. He looked from the bangle to the masterpiece on the loom and back again. A connection was made, a spark of jealous understanding. It was a shortcut, a trick, some kind of juju. He didn't know how, but he knew, with a certainty that burned in his gut, that the secret was on her wrist. The days that followed were a waking dream for Helen. The magic, it turned out, was not a fleeting gift. Every time she sat at her loom, the bangle would warm her skin, the energy would fill her, and her hands would create wonders. She produced masterpiece after masterpiece, each one more beautiful than the last. Word spread through the market like fire in a dry field. People came not just to buy from Madame Tessie's stall, but to watch the girl with the gifted hands. Ogas and madams from every corner of Lagos would come and place orders, offering sums of money that made Helen's head spin. Madame Tessie's anger was a distant memory, replaced by a mixture of pride and utter bewilderment. She treated Helen no longer as an apprentice, but as a treasured artist. And through it all, Helen remained humble and quiet. She worked with a joyful heart, grateful for the mysterious gift she had been given. At night, she would look at the simple brass bangle and whisper a quiet, "Thank you," to the old woman she had met only once. But while Helen's star rose, Bayo's heart filled with a dark and poisonous envy. He watched her every move. He saw the respect she was given, heard the praise that was heaped upon her, and saw the money that flowed into the workshop because of her talent. And every time, his eyes would drift back to the ugly brass bangle on her wrist. That should be his. The praise, the money, the respect. He was the one who understood the world, who knew that success was something you took, not something you earned. Helen was weak, a fool who had stumbled into good fortune. He deserved it more. His envy grew from a small, bitter seed into a great, choking vine that wrapped around his heart. He stopped working almost entirely, spending his days watching Helen, his mind scheming. He had to have what she had. He had to find that shortcut. On the 6th day, as Helen finished a cloth so beautiful that made a wealthy customer weep with joy, Bayo made a decision. His eyes, hard and resolute, stared at the bangle on her wrist. Tomorrow would be the 7th day. He didn't know what that meant, but he wouldn't wait to find out. He would find that old woman. He would get his own bangle, and he would not be foolish enough to take just one. He would take them all. Of course, the 7th day dawns, and with it, a choice that will unravel a destiny. The sun that rose on the 7th day cast a golden glow over the city of Lagos, but Bayo's heart was filled with a shadow. He did not go to the workshop. He didn't even glance at his loom, which sat gathering a fine layer of market dust. He had a different kind of work to do today. a hunt. He left the small room he shared with the other boys before any of them were awake, his mind a feverish swirl of strategy and greed. He plunged into the market, as it was just beginning to stir, a hunter in search of very specific prey. But the market in the morning was a different beast. It was groggy and ill-tempered. Bale pushed through crowds of men hauling heavy sacks, dodged carts laden with yams and peppers, and ignored the calls of the bread sellers with their fragrant morning offerings. He was a man possessed. He peered down every alleyway, his eyes scanning every stall, every corner where an old woman might sit. But the mother of the market was not to be found so easily. She was part of the market's spirit, and it would not give up its secrets to a heart as demanding and impatient as Bayo's. He asked other vendors, describing her. He'd say, "A very, very old woman, maybe selling beads or spices. Her back is bent like this." He would hunch over in a crude imitation. The vendors would just shake their heads. Some would look at him with disinterest, others with suspicion. "There are 100 old women like that in Belogan, my friend," a butcher told him, wiping his hands on his bloody apron. "You are looking for one grain of sand on the beach." Frustration began to curdle Bayo's resolve. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the corrugated iron roofs, turning the alleyways into ovens. His confidence began to wane, replaced by a whining internal monologue. Was this a fool's errand? Had he missed his chance? Perhaps the old woman had vanished, a spirit returning to where she came from. He was about to give up, to return to the workshop and suffer another day of watching Helen's success, when he saw her. She was sitting on a low stool in a quiet corner, away from the main river of traffic, mending a fishing net with slow, deliberate fingers. It was her. There was no mistaking the ancient peace in her posture, the timeless map of wrinkles on her face. A surge of triumph shot through Bayo. He quickly smoothed his shirt, wiped the sweat from his brow, and composed his features into a mask of pitiful sorrow. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. He approached her not with a push, but with a rehearsed, respectful slowness, casting a shadow over her work. She did not look up immediately, continuing her slow, methodical mending. "Mama?" Bayo began with a thick, fake, trembling emotion. "Forgive me for disturbing your work." "The work is always disturbed in the market, my son. What is it you want?" "Want?" Bayo let out a sound that was supposed to be a sad laugh. "I want for nothing, Mama. I only wish to help others. But I am in a desperate place." He knelt down, forcing tears to well in his eyes. He thought of all the things he didn't have, the car, the nice clothes, and found the emotion came surprisingly easily. "My own mother," he lied, his voice cracking, "is sick in the village, very sick. The doctors say she needs medicine that costs more than I have ever seen. And my father, his roof was taken by a storm. My little sisters, they cannot go to school. I work and I work. I work harder than anyone, but the money is never enough. I see others succeed around me, and I thank God for their blessings. But I ask him, when? When will it be my turn to rescue my family?" He put his head in his hands and produced a series of shuddering, dramatic sobs. It was a masterful performance, worthy of a stage. He felt a flicker of pride at his own cleverness. The old woman finally stopped her work. She placed the net beside her and slowly, deliberately looked at him. Her eyes were not filled with the pity he expected. They were calm, clear, and deeply, terrifyingly perceptive. For a moment, Bayo felt like a small boy caught stealing sugar, his lies melting away under her powerful gaze. But the feeling passed, and his greed reasserted itself. "A heart that worries for its family is a heavy burden," the old woman said, her voice even. "Stand up, my son." Bayo stood up, wiping his fake tears away. "Thank you, Mama. You are the first person to show me any kindness." Kindness is a seed. It only grows in worthy soil. "Come."
She rose from her stool and led him away from the small clearing, deeper into the maze of the market. They walked down a narrow, winding path he had never seen before, behind stalls piled high with dusty, forgotten wares. They came to a dead end, a small, hidden space between 3 towering walls of goods. It was silent here. the roar of the market a distant sea. In the corner, covered in cobwebs and shadows, sat a large earthenware pot. It was ancient and plain, the kind of pot one might see in a history book. "My own wealth is small," the old woman said, gesturing towards the pot. "But this pot is for those in true need. It holds help, a gift from the spirit of the market for her children who suffer." Bayo's heart began to pound against his ribs. This was it, the source, the treasure. "Reach inside," she instructed. "Take what is offered, but take only one. It is all that a person of honor requires. One is a blessing, more is a burden." His hand trembled as he reached into the cool, dark mouth of the pot. His fingers brushed against smooth, cool metal. It was them, the bangles. His breath hitched. He wrapped his hand around one, its weight feeling solid and real. This was the key to everything he had ever wanted. He pulled it out. It was identical to Helen's, dull, plain, and ugly, but he knew its secret. "Thank you, Mama," he breathed, his eyes wide with avarice. "Thank you." The old woman simply nodded, her gaze never leaving his face. "Remember what I said. One is a blessing." One. He looked at the single, pathetic bangle in his hand. One? Helen had one and she was a star. But what if he had 5 or 10? He would be a king. He would be more than a star. He would be the sun itself. He glanced at the old woman. She was just standing there, ancient and frail. What could she do? And then he looked around the secluded alley. No one was watching. The market was a world away. Greed, powerful and swift, drowned out the last whisper of the old woman's warning. His heart hammered. His breath grew shallow. This was the moment, the shortcut. His hand darted back into the pot, quick as a striking snake. There was no finesse, no hesitation. He did not just take one more, or 2. He plunged his hand deep and grabbed a whole, clattering handful, stuffing them into his pocket before his mind could even process the treachery. The cool metal felt like fire against his skin. A jolt of pure, triumphant adrenaline shot through him. He had done it. He did not look at the old woman again. He did not offer another word of thanks. He could not face those knowing eyes. He simply turned and ran, pushing his way back into the market's main thoroughfare, the stolen bangles clinking softly in his pocket with every step. It was the sound of his future, the sound of his triumph. He fled the scene of his crime, his heart soaring with a thief's ecstatic joy, leaving the mother of the market standing alone in the shadows. She did not move. She did not call out. She simply watched the space where he had been, her ancient face a mask of profound and terrible sorrow. She gave one slow, final nod, not of approval, but of confirmation. The test had been administered, the choice had been made, and the consequences, like the evening tide, were already beginning to roll in. Of course, the choice has been made, the theft is complete. Now the story turns to the high and terrible price of a greedy heart. Bayo did not run back to the workshop immediately. First, he needed to put distance between himself and the scene of his triumph. He plunged deeper into the market, losing himself in the anonymous crowds, the stolen bangles a secret, heavy treasure in his pocket. They clinked together softly with each step, a sound only he could hear, a private music of his impending kingship. He felt electric, alive, his mind buzzing with possibilities. He was no longer Bayo the lazy apprentice.
He was Bio the mastermind, the one who had cracked the code of life while everyone else toiled away foolishly. He bought a meat pie from a vendor, not because he was hungry, but because he could. He ate it with the swagger of a man who knew his days of wanting were over. He imagined the look on Madame Tessie's face when he unveiled a cloth more magnificent than anything Helen could ever dream of. He pictured Helen's own expression, the confusion, the envy, the dawning realization that he, Bio, was the true genius. The thought was sweeter than the pie itself. When he finally returned to the stall late in the afternoon, he wore a mask of nonchalance. Helen was at her loom, as always, radiating a quiet joy as she worked. She was finishing a commission, a stunning wrapper in shades of sunset orange and deep purple. Bio looked at it with new eyes. It was beautiful, yes, but it was the work of a child. What he was about to create would be the work of a god. "You have returned," Madame Tessie noted, her voice neutral. "I trust you were not helping anyone today." "No, madam," Bio said with a smooth, false smile. "Just clearing my head. Sometimes you need space to find inspiration." He waited, his patience a thin veneer over his frantic excitement. He endured the rest of the afternoon, watching the clock, waiting for the market to begin its slow, tired process of closing down. When Madame Tessie finally dismissed them for the day, his heart hammered against his ribs. Helen packed her things and left, giving him a small, friendly wave, which he barely returned. He was now in a different league from her. They were no longer peers. He waited until he was sure he was alone, then scurried back to his corner of the workshop. This was his stage. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his treasure. Not one, but 6 brass bangles clattered into his palm. They felt cool and heavy. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. Helen had been a fool to be satisfied with one. Why be a star when you could be an entire galaxy? He slid the bangles on his arms, 3 on his right wrist, 3 on his left. They felt like the cuffs of a king, the weight of them a promise of immense power. He flexed his fingers, imagining the magic, the raw creative energy that was about to surge through him. He sat at his loom, the very loom he had ignored and disdained for months, and saw it now as his throne. He took a deep breath, puffed out his chest, and reached for the threads. He was ready to create his future. The moment his skin touched the cotton, a shock went through him. But it was not the pleasant, warming pulse Helen had described to Madame Tessie. It was a jolt of ice. The bangles, which had been cool, now felt deathly cold against his skin, like shackles pulled from a frozen river. A shiver traced its way up his spine. He ignored it. It was probably just the magic starting, he told himself. He grabbed the shuttle and tried to envision a pattern. He thought of the things he wanted most. A car, shining and black. A watch, its face glittering with diamonds. He tried to translate that desire into a design, but his mind was a murky swamp. Instead of brilliant patterns, all he could see were ugly, chaotic shapes. Jagged lines of mud brown and sickly green clashed in his imagination. The image of a pile of rotting garbage flashed in his mind's eye, the colors dull and putrid. He shook his head, trying to clear it. What was this? Where were the beautiful designs? He tried to force it. He pushed the shuttle through the loom, but his hand, which he expected to be swift and sure, was suddenly clumsy. He fumbled, dropping the shuttle with a loud clatter. Annoyed, he picked it up and tried again. This time, as he touched the threads to guide them, they felt brittle, dry. With a sharp snap, a thread broke. "Ah!" he cried out in frustration. He tried to tie it, but his fingers felt thick and useless, like sausages. He couldn't manage the simple knot. He tried to weave again, his movements jerky and angry. Snap! Another thread broke, and another. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at him. Why is it not working?
The realization did not come as a quiet dawn, but as a crashing, terrifying storm. A scream of pure rage tore from his throat. "It's broken!" he shrieked, grabbing the fledgling, ugly mess of threads on his loom and tearing it apart with his bare hands. "Everything is broken!" He stood up, his body trembling, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. He looked at his hands, the instruments of his expected triumph, but they felt strange, alien. He lifted them to his face, and a new horror seized him. They seemed to be tingling, burning, as if he had plunged them into a bowl of fresh, crushed pepper. "Pepper!" he screamed, stumbling backwards and tripping over his stool. "My hands are on fire! They are covered in pepper!" He began to rub them frantically on his trousers. Soon his body was covered with boils. At that moment, Madame Tessie and Helen, drawn by the terrible screaming, rushed back into the stall. They found a scene of utter chaos. Bio was on the floor, surrounded by broken threads and an overturned stool. He was writhing, clutching his hands to his chest, his eyes wide with a terror they could not comprehend. "Bio!" Helen cried, rushing towards him. "Stay back!" he shrieked, scrambling away from her. "Don't touch me! The pepper! Can't you see it? It's everywhere! On my hands, in my eyes! I cannot work! It's all useless! Useless!" He began to laugh, a high, unhinged laughter that echoed through the quiet, darkening market. It was not a laugh of joy or humor, but the terrible, broken sound of a mind that had been shattered by its own reflection. Helen and Madame Tessie stood frozen, looking at the raving, pathetic figure on the floor. They saw no pepper. They saw only Bio, who had, in the space of a single afternoon, lost his grip on reality. They looked on with a mixture of horror, fear, and a deep, sorrowful pity, not knowing they were witness to a justice as old as the market itself. Of course, the threads of fate have been woven into chaos. Now comes the time to see if they can ever be untangled. The high, unhinged laughter of Bio echoed in the sudden silence of the evening market. It was a sound stripped of all joy, a hollow shell of a sound that chilled the air more than any nighttime breeze. Madame Tessie, a woman who had faced down aggressive landlords, cunning rivals, and city officials with unwavering nerve, took an involuntary step back. This was a trouble she did not understand, a madness that had no place in the logical world of profit and loss. But Helen felt not just fear, but a dawning, terrible understanding. Her eyes flickered from Bio, writhing on the floor and clawing at his hands, to the beautiful, perfect cloth she had woven that afternoon. Then she looked down at her own wrist, at the dull, ugly brass bangle that was still warm against her skin. "One is a blessing," the old woman had said. "More is a burden." And Bio, in his madness, was screaming about his useless hands, the very hands he had hoped would bring him glory. The connection formed in her mind, as clear and certain as a thread snapping on a loom. This was not a random fever. This was not a curse from a business rival. This was the dark side of the gift she had been given. This was the consequence of a greedy heart. The bangle was a mirror, and Bio had been shattered by his own reflection. "We must get him to his room," Madame Tessie said, her voice strained but practical. "Perhaps a good night's rest?" But Helen knew that sleep would not cure this. "No, madam," she said, her voice quiet but firm with a newfound authority. I think I know who can." The next morning, the market was once again a river of life. But Helen and Bio were two ghosts walking against the current,
Bio was a hollowed-out version of his former self. His arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a shambling, uncertain gait. He clutched his hands to his chest as if they were wounded birds, muttering to himself about the fire and the pepper that only he could feel. His eyes, once sharp with cunning and envy, were now clouded with confusion and fear. Leading him was an ordeal. People stared. Some pointed and whispered, recognizing the once proud apprentice in his pitiful state. Is that not Madame Tessie's boy? What has happened to him? Helen ignored them, her face a mask of determination. She held Bio's elbow gently, guiding him through the labyrinthine paths, her heart aching with a mixture of pity and resolve. This was her responsibility. She was the one who had brought the magic into their lives, and she would be the one to see this through to its end. She did not search for long. It was as if the mother of the market knew she was coming. She found her in the same quiet clearing as before, sitting on her low stool, weaving a small, intricate basket. She looked up as they approached, her ancient eyes holding no surprise, only a deep, waiting sorrow. Helen gently led Bio forward and, in an act of profound humility, knelt before the old woman, pulling the confused Bio down with her. "Mama," Helen began, her voice trembling but clear, "I have come to beg your mercy. Look at him, please. Whatever this is, whatever has happened, please undo it." The mother of the market looked at Bio, who had begun to whimper softly, rocking back and forth. "I have not done anything to him, child," she said, her voice calm and steady. "The magic of this place is a mirror, not a sword. It does not strike. It only shows what is already there." She turned her powerful gaze to Bio, and for the first time a flicker of lucidity returned to his eyes. He saw not just an old woman, but a presence, an authority as old as the market stones beneath him. The wall of his madness cracked. I saw her," he whispered, pointing a trembling finger at Helen. "She was so fast, so good. I wanted it. I wanted what she had." "And what did she have?" the old woman pressed. "The magic," Bio sobbed, the confession tumbling out of him now. "The bangle. You gave her one and she became a star. I knew it was a shortcut. I found you. I lied to you. My mother is not sick. I lied."
Tears streamed down his face, real tears this time, born not of self-pity, but of a deep, soul-crushing shame. "You told me to take one," he choked out. "You said one was a blessing, but I was greedy. I stole more. I stole 6 of them." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the handful of dull brass bangles. They clattered onto the ground between them, a small pile of his shame. "I put them on," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "And everything went wrong. The threads broke. The colors turned to mud. My hands are on fire, Mama. I cannot make them work. The magic, it cursed me." The mother of the market shook her head slowly. "No, my son," she said, her voice filled with a profound sadness. "The magic did not curse you. You cursed yourself with your own heart. The bangle does not create talent, it only amplifies what is already there." In Helen's heart, it found a love for the craft, a passion for beauty, and a patient, humble spirit. So it amplified those things, and her hands created masterpieces. She leaned forward, her eyes holding Bio's. But when the magic looked into your heart, what did it find? It found no love for the work. It found laziness. It found a desperate envy. It found the heart of a thief. So it amplified those things. Your laziness became incompetence. Your envy twisted your sight until you could not see beauty. And your greed for a reward you did not earn resulted in your hands being able to create nothing at all. The pepper you feel is the fire of your own wanting, burning you from the inside out. A silence fell over the small clearing, broken only by Bio's quiet, shuddering sobs. He finally understood. He had not been struck down by a vengeful spirit. He had been poisoned by his own soul. Helen, her heart overflowing with pity, looked at the old woman. "Please, Mama, he has learned. Is there nothing you can do?" The mother of the market looked at Helen's compassionate face, and then at the broken, weeping boy on the ground. She nodded slowly. "A lesson learned in humility can heal many wounds. Because you have asked, child, and because he has confessed his truth, the burden can be lifted." She reached down, and, one by one, she picked up the 6 bangles from the ground. Then she gently took Bio's wrists and slid the other bangles off his arms. As the last one was removed, Bio gasped, a deep, shuddering intake of breath. The frantic terror in his eyes subsided, replaced by an immense, bone-deep exhaustion. He looked at his hands. "The pepper," he whispered, flexing his fingers in disbelief. "It's gone. The burning, the tingling, the curse, it had vanished." He was left with only the cold, heavy weight of his shame. Then the old woman turned to Helen. "And now for you." She reached for Helen's wrist. "No, Mama," Helen said quickly. "It was a gift. I will treasure it." "The bangle was a seed, Helen, but the tree has now grown in your own heart. The magic is no longer in the metal, it is now in your hands. You do not need it anymore." She slid the bangle on her arm. Helen felt a brief sense of loss, but then she looked at her own hands and realized the old woman was right. The confidence, the clarity, the wellspring of creativity, it was all still there, a permanent part of her now. She had passed her test, and the reward was her own awakened potential. The mother of the market held the collection of bangles in her palm and closed her fist. When she opened it again, they were gone. "Go now, children of the market. Go and live the lessons you have learned." They walked back to the workshop in silence. It was a different kind of silence than before. Bio's was heavy with shame and the daunting task of starting over. Helen's was calm, filled with the quiet strength of a person who understood her own worth. From that day on, everything was different. Bio, humbled to his very core, became a quiet and diligent apprentice. He swept the floors, he warped the looms, he did the menial tasks without complaint. He had a long road to walk before he could ever hope to create something beautiful, but for the first time, he was on the right path. Helen, free from the need for a magical aid, continued to flourish. Her fame grew, and it was not long before Madame Tessie, with tears of pride in her eyes, helped her secure her own very own stall. She hung a simple, hand-carved sign above it that just said, "Helen." It was all she needed. And so our story ends, a story of 2 hearts, tested by the same magic. One, hollow with greed, was broken by it. The other, full of kindness, was made whole. For in the great living market of life, you cannot steal the fruits of another's labor. You can only harvest what you have planted in the soil of your own soul. Now, I would love to hear from you. What did you learn from this story? Please drop your thoughts in the comments section. I'll be reading all of them. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the subscribe button and share it. Thank you so much for your time, and I will see you in the next story. Remain blessed.